My mom worked at a small store, and since we were young, we hung out there a lot with her. One night, there was an accident about a quarter of a mile down the road from the store. Me and my sister were outside watching all the lights from the cops and ambulances. We lived in a small town, so we really didn't see cops or anything often. A guy from out of state pulls in and notices how interested we are in the accident. Smiling, he approaches and says, "Hey, how are you two? You like those lights over there?" Me and my sister nodded eagerly. "Well, I've got to run into the store real quick, but when I come out, I can drive you over to it so you can get a closer look." Me being 4 at the time, thought this was a great idea, but my sister was a little older, and a red flag popped up in her head. He enters the store, and we follow. My mom is the cashier and sees that he is walking around the store, looking around as much as he can. Not at items, but at other people. He was looking for our mom, and didn't assume she was the cashier. He buys like 1 or 2 items, and as he is about to leave, me and my sister are running around to another part of the store, totally forgetting the accident and moving on to something else to keep our attention. He goes, Hey, where are you going? I thought we were gonna go out together." My mom instantly freaks, calls the police, and he flees. The whole time it was happening, I was totally oblivious, but after my mom freaked, I was really upset. All I really knew was that someone tried to take me from my mom, and I didn't really understand it, but it was pretty terrifying. For a while, I didn't talk to anyone I didn't already know. This happened when I was about 18 years old. I was big into running back then, and lived in a town that was a suburb, but had big swaths of farmland, as in smallish tomato and strawberry fields, not huge, never-ending wheat fields. I preferred running on the dirt at the edges of these fields because it was a lot easier on my legs than running long distances on concrete or asphalt, and I was usually training for half marathons, 13.1 miles for those who aren't insane enough to think running is fun. This particular day, I was planning to run an easy 6 miles. I told my mom, and she suggested I do a loop and meet them at the dog park about 3 miles from our house as my halfway point. This is pre-cell phone era, when all the craziest shit went down, but being careful, I took a walkie-talkie that my dad always used, and my mom took the other one. Now the walkie-talkie had a range longer than the ones my brothers and I played around with when we were younger, but it definitely did not work 3 miles away, and I honestly had no idea what its exact range was. I take off on my run. I'm planning to go to the sidewalk for a little bit, until I get to the fields. I'm running in the dirt with the road a few yards to my left. I have to run south, and then turn right onto a slightly smaller, less traveled road to get to the dog park. As I'm running on the first dirt path, my parents drive by and, being dorks, they honk and wave and yell at me. I wave, and then soon after, I make my turn onto the smaller road. This one is road, me on flat dirt, small drainage ditch, forever of lettuce field. Then a wall that is the backyard of some houses. I start noticing how quiet the street is, and how few cars are passing me. Then I randomly start thinking to myself, if someone tried to do something, I could run to those houses. No, they're so far away, I'd never make it. Then, I hear a car, but this one doesn't pass me like all the others. I hear it slow down so that it's behind me, just out of my peripheral vision. My senses go super alert, and I immediately realize what a dumbass I was to pick this route because I'm stuck out here with no one to help me and nowhere to hide. The car starts speeding up enough so that it's next to me. I glance over and I see a man. Middle-aged, white, dark hair. Totally normal looking, but I get a chill down my spine immediately. He sort of leans over into the passenger seat and says in a super sweet voice, "Hi, where are you going? Do you need a ride?" I am scared and I realize this is not good. Admittedly, nothing has happened yet, And he could be totally innocent, just wanting to chat, but my intuition is in overdrive, telling me I'm not safe. I hop over the ditch, thinking at least that will make it harder for his car to follow me if I need to take off across the field to try and make it to those houses in the distance. This pisses him off. He guns it and gets closer to the ditch and in front of where I am, and then he says in a voice I can only describe as bone-chillingly evil, "You know, you shouldn't be out here all alone. Something horrible could happen to you out here and no one would ever know where to find you." He has put his car in park and is taking off his seatbelt when I remember the walkie-talkie. The piece of crap is all static, but I'm too far away, so I immediately turn down the volume and say loudly, "Hey Dad! Yeah, I see your car. I'm over here by this red Buick, do you see me?" And I fake wave to no one. There was no car coming from the direction my parents were, and when I had started talking, there was no one behind us either. But by the grace of the universe, at that exact moment, a car turned onto the road. The guy saw it, looked at me, and sped off so fast he left skid marks. I have never run faster in my life, and I was looking behind me every few seconds and thought he'd be waiting for me at every intersection I had to cross. I was shaking. I was so scared and relieved when I got to that goddamn dog park. I told my parents everything and my mom called the cops. They took a statement but said it would just help if something actually happened to someone else. The weird part was, I was having trouble getting my story out. I was so upset, and before I gave a description of the car, the cop asked, "Was it a red Buick?" He wouldn't tell us why, but that just added to my feeling that I had narrowly escaped something awful. First of all, let me say that I'm a 24-year-old male, and I live in Brazil, and we are kind of in a really bad situation. Basically, our healthcare, education, and security are garbage at the moment, because of corruption and corporate greed. Last month, after I left my workplace, I went to my bus stop. Everything was normal except that my bus was really late, but that's very common. I got another bus that gets me a little further from my home, and I have to walk a little bit to get to it. The bus arrives at my stop, and I proceed to walk to my place when a car speeds over the sidewalk with a guy inside holding a gun to my face. "Get the fuck inside the car," he shouted angrily. I was so scared I just dropped my headphones, as I'm always listening to music. So I proceed to get near the door and pick up my headphones at the same time. "Hurry, motherfucker, get in the car." He was getting very impatient. Suddenly, while I'm holding the door and trying to open it, I see a blind spot. He cannot see me clearly, so I run like it's the fucking devil behind me to the opposite direction of the car. I hear screeches and a gunshot. I bolt into the first house yard that I see. Luckily the gate was open, and when I have nowhere left to run, and I'm just surrounded by walls, I look behind and I see a man running after me. I fall to the floor, covering my head and eyes with my arms, thinking, this is it. I'm gonna get shot in the head. Nothing happens. I open my eyes, and the guy was just the random dude that was near me in the street who, like me, ran, scared of the car and the gunshot. There were 3 ladies in that house. They helped me get my head back together before I left a couple of minutes later to my place, safe at last. So, whoever you are, and whatever you were going to do to me, please, let's not meet. I am a female, currently 22, and this happened back in 2008 when I was 14. Just some backstory. I was living in a small town out in the middle of nowhere in Australia. It was sometime in December when this happened because I remember it being hot. The main street was about a 2-minute walk across an empty lot and about another 3 minutes to the small market, which was where I was going on this day. I left my house and walked across the lot, no problem. When I got out onto the main street, a white ute turned the corner and slowed down next to me. The guy driving just kept staring. At the time, I was not the kind to confront people, so I just kept my head down and kept walking until I reached the market. I went into the market and got what I needed to get. When I left, the ute was parked across the market, near the bank, and the person was sitting in the car and it was idling. It was about 7:30 in the morning. The bank didn't open until 10. At the time, there was no ATM at the bank. You had to actually go in and get money out, so it is not like he was getting money out. As I started to walk back, the guy spoke to me through his window. He asked several times if I wanted a lift home. I told him no several times. I started to panic since I hadn't yet crossed the road, which means I had to cross in front of his car in order to get home. There was no other way home. I tried to keep my cool and I started walking across the road when he finally said, "Get in." This felt like a command, not a question, so I started to run, as fast as I could, across the rest of the road and through the parking lot. I got home and inside before the white ute came speeding around the corner past my house. He didn't see where I went. I couldn't stop crying and I told my parents. They called the police and an officer came, but since he didn't threaten or physically try to abduct me, there was nothing that could be done. I know this isn't the scariest story, but it was scary to me. I honestly believe if I was dumb enough to get in the car. Number 1. Read by Worst Nightmare.
This happened to a close friend of mine from work who told me this last night, and it sufficiently creeped me out. So her mother is in the hospital, and she was on her way home from visiting her one night last week. She stopped at the 24-hour Tesco on the way back to get some groceries and petrol, so it was around 10 p.m. when she finally set off for home, the journey to her house taking around 40 minutes. About 5 to 10 minutes into the usually routine trip home, she noticed a car coming up close behind her, flashing the lights as if trying to pull her over. It was just as she was approaching a few miles of road that were fairly deserted, save for a couple of houses, but mainly flanked by fields on either side. It was dark, so she couldn't make out the car or driver, but was fairly certain it wasn't a police car. Besides, she's a careful, teetotal driver with a fully functional vehicle. There should have been no reason for someone to pull her over. Also, she's not so naive that she would just stop on this lonely stretch of road for anyone without a good reason. The other driver was persistent, though, and alternately pulled really close, then backed off and flashed the lights. The car continued to follow closely and flash her. It was only as they entered a more populated area and more cars were driving around that the flashing lights and tailgating stopped. Still, right behind her, though. At this point, she was significantly freaked out, but in the panic of the moment, couldn't think what to do, and still wasn't positive she was being followed. But that was just wishful thinking, she said. The small town where she lives has a huge and very busy day and night as truckers use it to get onto the motorway roundabout with many lanes that must be navigated carefully as you approach. It's very easy to take the wrong exit, especially if you're unfamiliar with the area. She waited until the very last second before pulling out just before a truck, hoping that the car stalker would get stuck behind a stream of traffic. She could easily lose the car after that, she thought, as where she lives has so many roundabouts that if you don't know where you're going, you'd be lost without a GPS system. Her heart sank, though, when she heard the honk of a truck horn behind her, and looking in the rearview mirror, realized car stalker had took a chance, pulled out right after her, and was again now right behind her. With absolutely no doubt now that she was being targeted, her mind raced, and all she could think was that she couldn't drive home, or even to her daughter's or sister's house, as she didn't want to lead this person right to her or her family's door. She grew up in the town, though. She knows all the shortcuts, dead ends, roundabouts like the back of her hand. So she proceeded to lead a merry dance around the area, up a street, down a street, round a roundabout, double back, and so on. This went on for a while, maybe an hour or more, she estimated. Earlier, she had almost skipped getting petrol, as she knew she'd have just enough to get home. At this moment, she was thanking her lucky stars that she had got it, or she'd be breaking down right about now. The car was still following, but at a further distance this time. She pulled suddenly, without indicating, onto a long main road where there are about 10 or 12 identical side streets running parallel to each other all along the road. These lead up to cul-de-sacs that pretty much all look the same. Seeing no sign of a car behind, she swung into a random street, drove up a little behind another car, then killed the engine. Ducking down, after 5 to 10 minutes of what she described felt like holding her breath, she had another check of her surroundings, and it appeared she had lost the stalker. Full of relief, she turned around, pulled out of the side street, and there he was. She could make out the outline of a man in the driver's seat, so she knew for sure now he was male, which somehow made it so much worse. He had pulled up on the opposite side of the main road and was just waiting for her, like he knew where she'd gone and was just taunting her. Frozen for a second, she was unable to gather any more details before she got it together and sped off in the opposite direction. It took about another 30 minutes of cat and mouse, plus around 20 minutes waiting it out, before she finally lost him. She'd managed to quickly pull into an empty driveway after taking a few erratic turns. She was on the right side of a 4x4, which obscured her car, and she switched off all the lights before he'd had the chance to follow her. She waited even longer this time, though. She was sure he'd been waiting, but he must have either got bored or lost her. She was looking over her shoulder the whole way home, though, and she still does now. In hindsight, she realized the best thing to do would have been to go to the nearest police station, or at least call them. But hindsight is a wonderful thing. The next day, she was telling her daughter, who was furious with her for not calling the police or telling her sooner. She did then make a report at the local police station and was disturbed at what she discovered. First of all, her report was not the only one. 2 other women had reported almost identical experiences. One of them had called the police while being followed and asked if there were any unmarked police vehicles in the area that may be signaling for her to pull over. They indicated that there were not any such vehicles and advised the woman to pull into a nearby well-lit and staffed service station where they met her to take her report. He soon took off when he saw where she was headed. The other woman had managed to lose him also by driving towards the police station. This one was in broad daylight. There may have been more women who just haven't reported it. Even more worrisome, the police suspect the stalker is an already convicted rapist who has recently been released from prison. The M.O. in his previous crimes matches this. He would pose as a concerned fellow driver, pull a woman over with some BS about a light being out on her car or whatever, then pull her into the back of the car and rape her. They have been unable to charge him with anything so far, as, fortunately, he has not managed to succeed in his tactics this time. It is worrying to think, though, that this guy might have to actually rape someone before he can be arrested. And he's in my local area. Shivers. So, weird and creepy car stalker guy, let's not meet.
Number 2. Read by Mr. Sinister.
So last Saturday evening, myself and my girlfriend had gone out to a friend's to drink a bit and play games. Since I'm driving later on, I only have a couple of beers pretty early in. Anyways, we leave around 3 a.m. and on the way home, my girlfriend is craving some Jack in the Box since it's about the only food place that's open around that time. To clarify for people on the eastern side of the US, it's a fast food chain. Well, there's a couple of cars ahead of us, and the one immediately ahead has a few people, so it's a pretty large order, and taking a while. Pretty usual on a Saturday night, even that late. I guess I sort of space out as I'm talking to my girlfriend while we wait, because I hadn't noticed that I never put my window back up after ordering for her. I don't know what it was that made me glance in my side rear view, maybe just habit, but I see a person slowly walking up the drive-thru in a red sweater with their hood pulled all the way tight over their face. Now, on a really cold January night, something like that wouldn't strike me as too weird. However, it was a surprisingly mild temperature evening that night, which may be why I didn't notice my window was down in the first place. But as soon as I see this person, my brain just fires off all kinds of red flags. My girlfriend notices me tensing up a lot as I roll my window, make sure all the doors are locked and my eyes are glued to the rear view, not saying a word. I let her know that there's a person right there who is really shady looking. I've been a victim of a couple of muggings in the past, so she understands why I'm so on edge. This person, though, just keeps very slowly moving closer to the car, even after he must know I can see him. I start tripping out because the car up ahead still hasn't received their order, and this person is still moving up toward my car. And this is one of those narrow drive-thrus, so my only other escape route would be just towards him if he approached the car. So I quickly shift my car from neutral to reverse, and the guy stops as soon as those reverse lights come on, and then moves forward, still the same pace. This time I start revving with my e-brake engaged. He moves forward again. I rev up again, and I had a second to see him quicken his pace forward a little drastically before I reacted by disengaging the brake and reversing and pulling a really quick stopping short, so I only move like 6 inches back. He stops again. By this time the car in front is leaving, and I move up, pay, get my food, and inform the employee he's there. He's standing in the middle a few large paces back from my car, and I leave. I'm glad that whatever he was planning, he was hesitant about, as it's likely in the area I live in that he at least had a knife. I didn't hear any robbery reports either, so I don't think he bothered the employees, or they didn't go near the window while he was there. To the man in the drive-thru, let's not meet.
Number 3. Read by Worst Nightmare.
I literally just made this account to post here because I love the stories in this sub, and it made me remember one I experienced myself. Flashback to me when I was 17, just got back from work. I made it to the station near work on a hot summer day at the end of my shift. It was as usual as any. I took the train to the bus to another one. When I got to the station to take my final bus towards home, smoke began to submerge from the engine. Typical. My guardian couldn't pick me up at the station, so I had to walk the 7-mile route to home myself. As I crossed the street walking away from a near gas station, oh God, I should have just stayed there. Oh well. I noticed an elderly man walking behind me at a distance of around 50 meters. Now note that I usually overreact and panic a lot, but I had a tough day and I didn't think much of it. After 2 miles or so, the man was still walking behind me at the same distance and space, and now tiny alarm bells started softly ringing. So I used my main method to debunk my fears. Act like I'm in a phone call with someone and sit near a tree or wherever I can sit. Unfortunately, the man just slowed down until I started walking again. Now, I started to get more worried. I decided to quicken my pace and take a different route through a near town. Once again, the man was behind me. I figured that if I take a small alleyway, it would escape this pursuit. I was wrong. I took the alleyway and came down to a near small soccer field where some kids were playing soccer. I acted like I was very interested and sat down to watch their game. Finally, the man walked past me and slithered off into an unknown alleyway. Safe to say, I was relieved, but it doesn't end there. I waited 2 minutes before moving on and walked to a different alley, and guess who just came walking down another side road back to me? Yeah, damn right. Now I started to worry a lot. As a kid who is a bit overweight and has almost zero stamina, I knew I couldn't run. I walked normal towards another alley, and thank God I ran into a mother hanging up her laundry in her yard. I sat down near a trunk and tried to act like I was busy on my phone. Of course, at any given moment, right now was the best time for my phone to be completely drained of battery. I tried to leave when I just saw him walking behind me at a small pace, making eye contact. It was hard for me not to look him in the eyes, and I made sure I acted like I didn't notice him. Thank God, after about what seemed like an eternity, he left, but I knew it wouldn't be for long. He came back. I just knew it. I went to make my way out of the alley. When I was almost out the street, I felt it. I felt it. I know in my gut. He was lurking at me with those eyes. I just knew it. So I listened to my instincts and began to run as hard as I could, ignoring oncoming traffic and whatsoever. I ran into a big building office thing, and I almost jumped inside, breathing heavily. I told them what had happened, and I asked if I could maybe phone my group, that they just had to pick me up. It was urgent. But of course, they came with the answer I was already afraid of. No, sorry, we're making dinner, so we're very busy and can't pick you up. Are you sure you didn't just imagine the whole thing? Well, they helped me out a lot. I guess I was on my own. The office was about to close, and I had to leave. There I was again, alone, out on the streets. Just when I lost all hope and knew I would become one of those kids on TV who were missing only to never be found again, I spotted my friend in a car. He waved, and when I came storming down to his car, he knew something was off. I stepped into his car, explained everything, and we went looking for the man. Knowing my friend is skillful kickboxer, I knew what went down if we found him. Lucky for the creep, we didn't find him, and my friend proceeded to safely drop me off at home. Thank God. So, creepy old dude who was following me around, eyeing me, creeping on me, and ruining my day. Let's not meet. Ever again.
Number 4. Last month, I got a job in a mini-mart to pay for college since my savings weren't quite enough. I was only able to take night shifts since I spend most of the day at school and at home studying. When you're on the night shift, you're all alone. But it's not too hard, since barely anyone comes in during the evenings. There's an office where employees can hang out when there's nothing to do. There, you can monitor the security cameras and go over what needs to be done. The security cameras even have built-in motion detectors that will alert you if a movement is detected. I spend most of my time there with snacks, playing on my phone, while I wait for customers to come in. The other employees describe it as getting paid for being alone in a store, with the occasional break to help the handful of customers that come in during the night. On my first shift, I immediately noticed something out of the ordinary was going on. The motion detectors would go off when the store was empty and the cameras didn't show anything. Then I began hearing faint voices and footsteps from within the store. The voices would be indistinct but spoken in the same tone of voice that people usually speak in when they're chatting with someone they haven't met in a long time. Even customers would sometimes hear this and think it was me saying something when I really hadn't. I usually go to check but find nothing. The store is empty. Later, when I was refilling the soda cooler, I started seeing people walk past me in the reflection of the glass door, but no one was there. This happened several times, and I never saw anyone near me. The coolers would also sometimes open and slam quietly shut at random times. Do you know that feeling you get when you're in a crowded room? That minor claustrophobic sense, and that feeling like people are looking at you? That's how I always feel when I'm closing up the store and cleaning up. It could be paranoia, and I'm just imagining it, but my past experiences lead me to believe it is not. I've never had the nerve to mention this to my boss, out of fear of getting labeled crazy and possibly getting fired for being unfit. But I'm dead certain there is something going on there. I don't intend to quit anytime soon, since I don't feel like I'm in any danger, and I need the money, but this scares me a lot. Every night seems to have more going on than the last, and I've began writing down in my phone what I witness. I'm not aware that anyone has ever died in this store, but the store has been open since the 1920s, and anything could have happened. I've wanted to research it, but it's changed names and owners several times, which makes it hard to do so.
So before I start, I want to thank the people who are reading/listening to this. It is important to understand that the word colorblind is actually very ignorant and insensitive, especially if no one is saying it to a person of color. It is okay to see color. If you walk in a field of beautiful roses, all ranging different colors, are you going to say, no flower is better than the other, therefore I don't see the colors of the petals? It is okay to see color. Acknowledging the cultures and backgrounds of where people came from is okay. That is what makes us special. No one needs to be subjected to intolerance and racism because of it. Good. Now that that's out of the way, I'll start. It was around 6 o'clock at night a few weeks ago, and I was walking with a group of friends, all of whom I have known since I could recall my first memory. Among them was my boyfriend, Alexander. Though many people call him Alex, I prefer Alexander because it sounds much more elegant that way. I was the only girl in the group of 5 guys who were like my brothers, walking to a diner from a meetup we had at a local school. Now, I have to stop you. The reason I spoke about race at the start of this story was because the neighborhood we were walking was a majority white. Hell, our university was majority white and known for its association with the Ku Klux Klan a while back. I know you guys are asking why I went down there, and in truth, because there was no reason not to. As I said, the Klan Association was a while back, and I had walked down this road before. Plus, I assume people were smart enough to know to be kind to people who don't look like them. As we walked down the street a little faster, as it was getting darker outside, we saw it, dare I say it, white people staring at us like we were from another planet. Granted, our voices were a little loud, and there was a group of boys following a girl down a sidewalk. Sounds like the perfect setting for a rape, but I was fine. In fact, I made it a point, as more and more people were staring at us, to laugh and smile more than needed to express my enjoyment. As we neared the corner, we saw a car drive past us at top speed. The blur of a woman maybe in the driver's seat. I remember looking at Alexander in dismay before he grabbed my arm in such a rough fashion and yanked me back so hard. I thought he was going to rip my arm off. He gave me a look that said, "Yeah, I just saved my girlfriend's life. What now?" I punched him in the arm and laughed. We waited as more cars drove past before we could walk. All the car drivers looking at my friends as if we robbed a bank. Accusing eyes burrowed into our souls. It was odd, I have to admit. I don't want people to think that a group of young people walking down the street at dusk was an omen of bad times ahead. No! We were just a group of young people walking down the street, laughing and joking. No big deal. We crossed the street and continued on our hike, the breeze picking up now. I remember looking at my friend Adam's profile and saying to him, "You have such a strong jawline." He laughed and blushed, hard, and a charmer I was. Then we passed a large, well, not that large, rather than a normal size house that looked large because the darkness emphasized the shape. House that stood idly by the corner where the diner was located. And no, for those who have been asking, this diner was not Denny's. I don't fuck with Denny's, mostly because of the food not being good. The house gave me the chills. Every time I passed it, I would feel the need to cross the street, but this time, even though I still had the feeling, I knew I was safe because I had my boys with me. We walked past the house. This time there was a woman in the yard, doing something with her rosebush at night. Okay. I was cautious to tell the truth. She was turned away from us and in her garden. At night! Like, what the fuck? Who does that? However, no matter how weird the situation was, I was raised by two polite people. I came to a halt, my friend Jacob running into me. Again, Alexander caught me before I could fall forward. I called out to the woman, "Hello there!" She turned around and, unlike many of the stories on Reddit or whatever other storytime funtime sites there are on the web, this lady looked relatively normal. Aside from the PJs she was wearing, I'd say this bitch was normal. She looked at us and said nothing. Her arms were just crossed, and her face had a stone-cold look on it. I took a step back, bumping into Jacob again. I couldn't just leave now. The lady saw us, and therefore coming back would be more awkward than uncomfortable. So I repeated myself. I'm such an idiot. "Hi, ma'am." Again, she made no move to respond, so I looked at Alexander, who was looking at her with his heart, took my hand. As we started walking again, something the lady said made us all turn around.
"You heathen niggers."
Or something along those lines. Jacob heard clearly, though. Jacob, who was a pretty big guy, not only in height but in weight, he weighed about 250 pounds and was a football player as well as a discus thrower like me. Jacob swung around and he looked at the woman. "Excuse me?" "Jake, don't!" I remember Alexander pulling at Jacob's sleeve. "You niggers need to get off my lawn," the woman yelled. We were so confused. I gave Jacob a look that said, "Did she just call us niggers?" Jacob nodded and looked back at the woman. She couldn't be much older than us, around 25 years old. The woman noticed that we weren't moving. I guess this bitch confused confusion with defiance. Hell, I bet the bitch confused 2016 for 1816. So, out of pure anger, I'm sure the woman said it again. Now I'm pissed. The only black person in the group was Jacob. I know, you guys are asking about my race by now. I'm a chocolate-covered, multiracial, 18-year-old girl. My mom is black and Arab, Israeli, Iranian, and Pakistani, and my father is Italian and black. Yes, I do consider myself black, but I was not expecting her to say nigger, and directed towards me and Jacob, who are hanging with a group of people who aren't even black. I know, you guys are asking me about the races, ethnicities, about my comrades who were with me. Well, Alexander is Indian, Adam is Pakistani and white, Quentin is Israeli and white, and Michael is Latino and Pakistani. In other words, we are all Arab or Arab mixes except for Jacob. I tell her this in less words, and the woman comes running at us with a gun she seemingly pulled out of nowhere. Alexander told me the reason he was staring at her so hard was because he saw the gun on her hip. We started to freak out. Well, I did, even though I came from a military family. My father and grandfather and uncle all served our country, and I knew what a gun looked like. I just have never been this close to one, and damn sure never had anyone charge at me with one. As we scattered, I heard a pop, pop, pop sound come from behind us. I let go of Alexander's hands and took cover behind some cars. Panting, I looked around for my friends and Alexander. I saw Jacob in the shadows looking directly at me. I put my finger on my lips in a motion that told him to shut the hell up, or we'd all get killed. I looked for Alexander and couldn't find him. I shouldn't have let go of his hand. I heard the woman approaching something a few meters away from the car I was behind. I came to a crouch and I peered over the car to see a body on the ground. No blood that I could see, just a body. I narrowed my eyes to see what the person was wearing and if they were breathing. They were. Just little shallow breaths, but they were breathing. Suddenly my brain registered that it was dark because I couldn't tell what the person was wearing. My heart thumped as I prayed to God that it was Alexander. And if it was him, then I prayed that he was going to live and someone from this neighborhood would come and save us. I turned back to Jacob, and I knew he could, since that I was going to do something crazy. I'm not a violent person. In fact, fighting makes me cringe. I hate it that much. However, even if the body wasn't Alexander, it was someone from my crew, and they were friends and a part of my family, and I had to help them. I crept around the car, careful not to slip on the rubble that surrounded the car. As I got on the curb and looked at the person who was on the ground, I had a complete meltdown. I broke down crying and saw the body of my boyfriend on the ground. Yes, blood was present and all over his sweater vest. I noticed Jacob get up and hear his feet beating against the gravel as he ran up to the woman who was still looking at me and tackled her. I don't know how he did it, but he got her to the ground without firing the gun. I saw Michael and Quentin run up to Alexander and roll him on his back. I wanted to yell, "Don't touch him!" afraid that he would die while they were trying to save him. I'm a biology major and I knew some stuff about the human body and some stuff from TV. All that shit flew out of my mind when I saw Alexander on the ground. I ran over to him and held his hand. I remember repeatedly telling him that he was going to be fine, and next year he was going to carry our school to nationals in distance. I remember hearing him look at me. His dark glasses somewhere on the other side of the world. He had the most beautiful eyes and without glasses on. I told him, "Alexander Gideon, if you die on me," I could have sworn he wanted to laugh, but probably not. There was an ambulance and police car that rounded the corner. I don't know who called or when they called, but I'm glad they did. The EMTs worked hard to keep him. I have to praise them for that. I give them props for not killing my boyfriend. Once I saw they got him stabbed, I noticed that the police car that had the crazy woman in it was driving away. It drove away, then the ambulance drove away, and just like that, the event was over. I couldn't eat after this, so I called my mother and father to come pick me up. When they arrived, I proceeded to tell them what happened between me, my friend's boyfriend, and that crazy-ass lady in the yard. And I said just that, crazy-ass lady with a gun. I'm not supposed to cuss, but I was scared and worried not only about my boyfriend, but my other friends who would have to return to the university, and for my life, because as I stated before, this area was associated with the Klan. I asked my parents to drive me to the nearest hospital as I called Alexander's parents. When I told them, all I could do, as I could hear his mother sobbing in the background, was pray that he didn't lose too much blood. The EMTs told me he was shot in the shoulder, and I knew there was an artery over in that area. Now, a few weeks later, I don't care. No one but my friends, my parents, and Alexander's parents have dropped by to see him, and I don't expect racist people to do so. Alexander is doing fine and will be returning to university in a few weeks. Guys, don't fuck with racist people. Treat each other with respect and don't walk down a notorious Klan operational neighborhood at night. Not if you're black, not if you're Latino, not if you're Indian, not if you are anyone. Those guys live in their own world and will not hesitate to kill anyone, even a group of student athletes.
It happened to me when I was 15. I've always been the type to hang out with people but not make them take care of me since I was younger than most of my friends. I had went to the fair the date we were supposed to, but I had a friend that wanted me to go on a separate day. He drove me with him there, and I obliged to take our DART train system that was part of our country. Most of the people had taken it when the fair was open, so they wouldn't have to pay for parking. The train ran about 45 minutes away from the station in my city, sometimes longer since there were multiple stops and people going in and out. I've taken the train many times before with friends and even on my own. I had left my friend to go home around the evening and started to get darker. I was wearing shorts and glitter clothes and had my purse on me. Just to mention the fact that I was young and very much alone on the train. There had been a bunch of people on the train, but as soon as 20 minutes passed, more and more people got off, but a few got on to go wherever the train directed. The DART train was very much sketch. I was afraid sometimes to be going to some stations because of the type of people that were on it. I am a very tough girl for my size, 5'2" and a wrestler. I had some skills. Another thing I just remembered was that I had got a can of pepper spray from my friend's house earlier. I don't remember why I had taken it, but it ironically was needed. I sat in front of the sliding doors to watch the people that came in and sat close to the window, and there were double seats that were left empty. My intentions were for no one to sit behind me. There was a station that a couple of people got on, and an old man with glasses sat behind me. He looked normal, although he was dressed pretty poorly. Baggy pants and a white t-shirt. He sat in the double seat exactly behind me. The train went on. I started to hear some movement and a tug on my hair, thinking that the man had tired moving a bag. So I took a quick turn and looked at the ground behind me. There was no bag. I started to get nervous, thinking the man might try touching me. I stood still. Then I felt, without a doubt, a tug on my hair again. This time, when I turned around, I saw the nervousness in his face, just like he had gotten caught. So I knew he did. I got up and looked at him with anger and stormed off to sit in front of a line of women coupled together in seats ahead of where I was sitting. I hadn't looked back because I was worried I'd get the man's attention again. I had then remembered I had a pepper spray can in my purse, which I had then started to grip in my purse the entire time I sat there. After a couple stops, I looked back and he wasn't there. So I went back to where he sat because it was in a corner where I could be aware of surroundings. A man that sat across the aisle had seen the whole thing. He asked me what happened, and I told him the creep was touching my hair. He told me I should have protection on me in cases like this. He pulled out a switchblade and said he always carried it for events like that. The man kindly stayed and watched if any creep sat with me throughout the duration of the ride, till he had to get off at his stop, which was 2 stops away from mine. I had my friend picking me up at the stop. I got up at my stop, which was the very end of the train stop, and hoped there wasn't any weirdo waiting outside. I waited on my friend for a couple minutes, nervous and scared. She finally got there, and I told her everything. I haven't been on the train since.
My name is Corey. When I was young, around 9 or 10, my friends and I would go to the park by ourselves. It was only a few blocks away, so our parents would let us. One day we went behind the park and saw a very big sewer pipe. My friends and I went exploring in there all the time, each day deeper and deeper. I remember one time I went to the other side of town, coming across the parking lot of a drugstore. Every pipe would get smaller and smaller. The smallest one I went into was around 2 feet in diameter. After I went into that pipe, I was well ahead of my friends. When they got into the space I was in, we all saw a massive pipe. I would say around 15 to 20 feet in diameter, which was big for a little kid. Every pipe was lit up with natural light, except for this one. It was pitch black. Dimly lit cell phone flash could not do anything. I was the brave one, to say the least, leading the lines. No one else wanted to go in there with me, so I went myself. I couldn't see anything. The pipe reeked a horrendous odor I had never smelled, most likely death. I felt a warm, almost breath. I could feel something touch me. I asked my friends, which was silly to do because they were so far behind. When I walked deeper and deeper into the pipe, it smelled worse and worse and got much larger. I could hear a very loud splash of water, sounding like someone had been sprinting toward me. I ran out of the labyrinth that was the sewers as fast as I could. I told this to my parents, and they never let me go to that park alone ever again. I was terrified. Let's just say I never went in the sewers again.
So I live in a small village in the southeast of UK. I am a 16-year-old female and quite tall for my age, so I tend to attract unwanted attention wherever I go. And in this case, it's more sinister. My house is relatively small, but large enough to accommodate for me and my family. It's not really the house that bothers me, it's the location. All of the surrounding area is neglected, and the neighboring houses almost corner us into the car park opposite. People living next door to me have always been loud, and that's alright, as noise helps me sleep, however. The new friend that comes to visit them makes their calming chatter much more tenser. He tends to bark back at their dog, create arguments out of the blue, and continuously beats the fence that separates our gardens. One night, he was being especially aggressive and loud. I, being the nosy type, decide to look out of my bedroom window, which looks out on their garden along with mine. I watched them for a while, fascinated by how they all seemed to ignore his violent outbursts and still manage to have a nice time. Tommy, which I later found out is his name, notices me and looks up. Tommy is short, bald, quite chubby, and has a lazy eye that drifts to one side when he talks. When he notices me, he smirks to himself and winks. I immediately realize how rude I am being, giving him an apologetic smile, close my curtains, and go back to bed. The next day is Monday, and I have to leave the house by 7:30 in order to catch the bus to school on time. I usually leave with my younger sister, and we part halfway as she goes to a separate college, but for some reason this one time she sleeps through her alarm. I leave the house alone, and as in the middle of winter, it's still quite dark out, which makes my solo trip quite unsettling. As I get up to the point in which my sister and I part, I look back and see Tommy's distinctive white van speeding up the road. As he approaches me, he slows down, and so I take out my earphones and turn to face him. Thinking he wanted to tell me off about spying on his evening with his friends last night, I begin to get a little nervous. He gives me the same smirk he did the night before and says, "Hey, Jenny, right?" I then respond with a casual, "Yeah." He smirks again and says, "You want a ride? I'm on my way to the pub. You can come if you want. I won't tell." I give him a nervous smile and decline, starting to walk away, hoping he would get the message. He then drives slowly next to me and says, "I like your hair, red. Red-haired girls are always the sweetest." I thank him and speed up my walk and cut over the green to my bus stop. He then speeds off with a disappointed frown. Okay, well, nothing really happened after that until I went for a long weekend holiday with my grandparents and cousins to a farm. There I would stay in a very small caravan with them, just like what I had done when I was small. These happy memories of my past were crushed when I see an old familiar van parked a few spaces to the left of us. I feel my stomach churn, and I tell my grandmother. She tells me to stop being so paranoid and takes me by the hand to go and say hello. Tommy comes out with his girlfriend, with overjoyed expression on his face, which made me believe then that this could have actually been a coincidence. After my grandmother had finished chatting with them about past holidays and future plans, we head back to our caravan. The next day, Tommy is constantly looking out at our caravan and taking walks in front of us, then back again, for a few minutes every 2 hours or so. What really creeped me out was when we all went to see the animals at the farm. There were pens of animals all around this large room, with the odd hay bale nearby for us to sit with the animals and pet them. Me, being an animal lover, I sit down with a small lamb, and this helped me forget about the whole Tommy issue, until I feel the hay sink a little. I turned my head to see Tommy sitting next to me with a wide grin on his face. He started to stroke the lamb and purposely touching my hand as he does. Thankfully, my grandfather is really overprotective and saw this middle-aged man next to me, so instinctively he came over and sat very close to me and wrapped an arm around my back. This eased my nervousness for a while, until my little sister fell and started to cry, which left my grandfather to help her as he got up to help. I did so too, as I couldn't stand being alone with Tommy any longer. As I stood up, though, Tommy grabbed my arm and asked in a threatening tone, "Where are you going? You going to ignore me again?" I said I need to be with my grandfather, in which he replied, "Such a pretty thing like you needs to be kept clean." He then wiped the hay off my butt, whilst biting his lips slightly. I broke away from him and spent the rest of my holiday in our caravan. He hasn't really bothered me after that, except the occasional wink and his decision to help my dad with his car when he realized I was helping also.
This happened to me on July 4th, 2016. I'm a 14-year-old girl who lives in the United States. I'm 5'5" and I weigh 110 pounds. If this ended any other way, I don't think I'd be writing this at the moment. I was out with my older brother. I'll call him Jason to conceal any private details. We walked out front of our house and down a block, about a 1-minute walk to the park across the lot from our house. We had brought our camera to record the fireworks for our dad, who was overseas. We couldn't make it to the actual fireworks show because our car, a 1998 Durango model, had broken down a couple of days prior. Jason and I wanted to snag some fireworks from people who were lighting them, and so we waited for about 30 minutes in the pitch black before the fireworks actually started. We hit record, and though we could see the fireworks above the tree line, the camera couldn't catch them, so we headed back to our house. My brother led the way, and I followed. We were about 100 feet from our house when we heard more fireworks. Jason hit record and started filming. We were now in front of our neighbor's house, recording the fireworks we could see from behind their roof. All of a sudden, we see flashing lights coming from the neighbor's bedroom window. I thought this was strange, but it was none of my business to begin with. About 30 seconds passed, and a silhouette of a person appeared in front of the window. My brother and I kept recording even though we thought it was stupid. About 4 minutes passed, and we decided to head the rest of the way home. Then, all of a sudden, a light is lit at us. I turn around to see who the person is, but because of the light in my eyes, I couldn't see the person. We started walking faster, and so did the person. Jason walked ahead of me, and I tried to catch up. I turned around again, and the person was about 2 feet away from me, with the light still blinding my every glance. They could have easily grabbed me. I'd never been so afraid for my safety. All of a sudden, I hear my mom yell from the house. She yells at us to come back because we were gone for so long. About 45 minutes, I'd say. We yell back that we are coming up the driveway. I turn around again, and there is no person, no flashlight, no sign of life on the street anywhere. The figure had vanished like they were never there. I told my mom, but she just brushed it off. I never found out who was chasing after us, and I hope I never do.
This is an experience that has bothered me for years, so I felt I should finally post something about it in case it's helpful in some way. I used to live in a subdivision in the middle of nowhere north of Divide, Colorado. Our gravel street ended in a cul-de-sac, and we were the middle house of the three at the end of the street, which was on the side of a hill. Because we were pretty far away from anything, I was a latchkey kid and usually was home alone for a few hours after school. This took place in the early 80s when I was about 8 to 9 years old. One day, shortly after the bus dropped me off and I got home, I saw someone pull into the driveway. I didn't recognize him, so I hid behind our wood-burning stove in the corner. He came up and started insistently knocking on the door and looking in the window. He then strangely tried the doorknob. He just wouldn't stop knocking, so I came out thinking if this guy was a burglar and saw me, he would go away. When he saw me, he asked me, through the door which had a window pane, if I could open up the door, and I replied my dad was in the shower. He didn't react and said he was there to see my neighbors, mentioned them by name. I told him they lived next door in the house on the left. He said okay, seemed a bit frustrated, but started walking away to his car. But instead of getting in his car, he started walking around my house. The house was built on the side of a hill, so it had a walkout basement. I started freaking out because at this point this wasn't normal, and I thought he was going to try and get in through the sliding glass door in the basement, which was locked. I got ready to jet out the door and into the woods, but then I saw him come up the other side of the house, get into his car, and tear out of my driveway, up the gravel road. He never did go to my neighbors, who he said he was looking for. Sobbing, I picked up the phone and called my neighbor halfway up the street, who had a son my age and used to watch me sometimes. She had seen the car speed up the gravel road and told me to come over, so I took off running through the woods to my neighbor's house, avoiding the road in case he turned around and came back. Of course I told my parents, but I don't really think they let it sink in, and since my neighbors weren't home, they said he probably mistook the house. From my standpoint, I'm pretty sure if I opened that door, I would not be here today. No one randomly drives down my street, much less into the subdivision in the middle of the mountains where I lived, and I never saw the guy at my neighbor's house. I vaguely remember one of my parents asking my neighbors if they knew the guy based on the description. Shorter white guy, round glasses, long brown hair slightly balding, and a longish beard. But they didn't know who that might be. I've always felt he knew I was there alone, based on his non-reaction to me saying my dad was in the shower. He knew the layout of the house, which is why he walked down the side of the house to the walkout basement. He preferred not to leave any physical evidence, which is why he didn't break in. Not sure if my parents knew him or not, but because of the remoteness of the location and the fact we often played in the woods, I'm pretty sure if I did get snatched, they would have chalked it up to me getting lost/hurt wandering around. We moved out of state a year or so later. Never heard of any other local kids go missing, but I can't believe that this guy didn't try to make someone else disappear.
I'm a 19-year-old female living in the UK. I was on my day off from work, as I work 6 days a week at a very unpopular delivery service called Yodel. My mom was out the night before, staying at my grandmother's house due to her being ill. I have 2 small dogs, both Chihuahua cross Yorkshire Terriers, who don't really need all that much walking. But this Sunday morning, I was feeling it. It was around 7:30 in the morning, which means it was still pretty dark out when I put their coats on and left the house. The local park is a 2-minute walk away from my house, which I had no problem getting to. So cut to about 10 minutes into my walk. I'm halfway around the park when I notice that it's brighter than usual, so I turn around and see a car parked in the parking lot of this park, with its lights on full beam directed straight at me. Now at this point, I'm starting to feel uneasy, as I was about to start making my way back there, as that is the way that I had entered the park. But something in my gut told me that it was an incredibly bad idea, so instead, I decided to cut across to the adjoining field and made my way across from there, as there was a public pathway running parallel to both fields. So cut to about 15 minutes later, and I'm starting to calm down, feeling like I had just overreacted to the whole situation. I get to the end of the public pathway. I've passed a few harmless people, and I'm feeling pretty stupid at this point. What I'd forgotten was that the parking lot previously mentioned was just up the road, and the road I had come out at connected to it. As I was just about to turn off the public pathway back onto the main road, a car drives past me that, at first, didn't look particularly memorable until the passenger in the car drove past with the biggest, cruelest, most evil grin on his face as they passed me. I stopped in my tracks and they pulled up just down the road and waited. I started walking home double time, and the walk that would have taken me 20 minutes took me 10. And the entire walk home this car followed me. Thankfully, I had to cut through little alleyways to get to the road leading to the park, and I managed to lose them by the time I got to my house. After I'd caught my breath, I looked out my kitchen window carefully, without moving the blinds, to see 3 guys, maybe their mid-20s, stalking around the area, presumably looking for me and my dogs. So, to you 3 creeps who have prompted me to change my dog walking routine, let's not meet.
In my lifetime, a lot of weird shit has happened to me. Because of my parents' job, I've practically grown up in a courtroom, and I can say that I've seen some messed up stuff. I can also say that I've almost become desensitized to some of these things. That's some background on this situation. Now to get to the story. I used to go onto Omegle and get the IP addresses of some old creeps that were under the filter children or kids. I would clearly say that I was a minor, and if they continued making lewd comments trying to get me to do things or trying to expose themselves. I'd get their IP, send it to them, tell them where they lived, and say I was a simulated webcam used by the US government. Sometimes they'd laugh, sometimes they'd apologize, and sometimes they'd be scared shitless. I've encountered several of these guys before, but I can say that I'm very good at remembering faces. Fast forward to a few weeks later. I travel a lot, and I had just arrived in San Francisco, California. I went out to dinner with some family and friends at this popular restaurant. I sat down at the end of our table. It was one of those long tables that could seat plenty of people. There was another long table next to us. Now, I was sitting against the wall in the booth part. This gave me a great view of the whole restaurant. It didn't take long for me to realize that I was being watched. At the table next to us, there was a man, about 50 years old. He was sitting at the end of the table on the other side, so he was sitting diagonally from me. I thought he looked very familiar, and the guy was just grinning at me. I smiled politely, then looked down, hoping he'd stop. He didn't. I was starting to get uncomfortable. Why the heck was this guy staring at me, and why does he look so familiar? Then he spoke. "Hey there," he said softly. His voice was rough. I just looked back at him when it hit me. I had seen him on Omegle. But no, that's stupid. What are the odds of that? I just sat there, looking at him in total shock. He flashed me that creepy grin. At this point, my mother realized that something was wrong and asked what the problem was. I shook my head and the guy smiled at her. For the rest of the night, he continued to stare at me. A little while later, I got up to go to the restroom. In this restaurant, you either had to take an elevator or go around to the hotel next door to get upstairs to the restrooms. When I got to the elevator, I realized this guy was walking after me. He started to rush as soon as I climbed into the elevator. I pressed the close button and held it, praying it would close in time. Luckily, it did. As soon as I got out of the elevator, I ran to the restroom. I heard someone coming up the stairs, so I stood leaning against the door of the bathroom trying to listen. They stopped for a few minutes, then they started again, this time going back downstairs. I took in a breath and waited a bit before booking it back down. When I sat down, he smirked at me. I shot him a glare. Finally, the guy and his group got up to leave. Of course, this guy had to drop his fork. He told his friends that he'd be right there and that he'd meet up outside. He picked it up, looked me in the eyes, grinned, and said, "It was nice seeing you," then stood up and walked out. At the time, I just thought he was a major creep and that it was really weird that I had seen him on Omegle. Then I thought about it. This guy clearly remembered me. What if he had gotten on the elevator with me? It might have been nothing and it might not even seem like a big deal, but just looking into his eyes and seeing that grin, that was enough to give me chills. Anyway, I haven't been on Omegle since. My message to you reading this is to stay cautious and be careful if you go on sites like Omegle. You never know who you'll meet and what their intentions are. So creepy Omegle pedophile, let's not meet again.
I'm a 16-year-old girl, and as many teenagers, music is basically my life. I recently got new headphones which work very well, but I'm very clumsy and I broke a part of them. They still work, but I have to put my hands around my head to keep them in place. It takes me about 45 minutes to an hour to go home after school, which includes a tramway, a bus, and a bit of walking. I was really pissed about my headphones, so I thought that after taking the bus, I would play my music out loud on the street that leads to my house, knowing that there is usually no one taking the same way home as I do, aside from a girl who I don't know, but goes to the same high school as me. I really hoped that she wasn't taking the bus, so I could play music once I got off, but there she was. I have recently moved into a little village. I didn't know many places or streets to take instead of this one, which my father used to take by car. I thought it would be a bit longer, but I really didn't mind, so I just played my music. I quickly got bored because the sound coming out of my phone wasn't really loud. I put my headphones back on, even though I looked like a huge idiot holding them with my hands. As I got closer and closer to my house, I take a turn, and I see a man on the side of the road. He looked at me, threw something on the floor, and then walked to the middle of the road and stood there. I turned my music off and listened as he was saying things, though I couldn't understand much. He was staring and talking in my direction as I passed him. Being kind of creeped out by him, I looked behind me through my phone's reflection. He was following me, still talking. I walked a bit quicker. Then, I took the final turn and rushed into my house. I ran as fast as I could and locked myself in my house. I was home alone, so I quickly dialed the police number on my phone and had it ready, just in case. In the end, I didn't end up using it. Today, I saw some police cars going in that direction and learned that a little boy was reported missing. That's when it hits me. This wasn't the first time I saw that guy. One night after school, I was almost in front of my house when a hooded man ran away from the other side of the street. I clearly saw that he was staring at my house, which creeped me out. He had the same hood as the guy that followed me. Since then, I never go out without a small weapon. Please, be careful, even when you're close to home.
This story happened back in the late 90s when I was in 2nd grade. At the time, my uncle, my mom's younger brother, was enlisted in the U.S. Navy. Due to the nature of his job, he constantly traveled to other parts of the world. He was frequently stationed in different countries, sometimes for years at a time. Since he was usually so far away, my family did not get to see him very often. My mother and him were very close, and I had a special relationship with him as well. Every time he visited to a new place, he would send me a gift, a magic lamp from Saudi Arabia, castanets from Spain, rosary beads from Notre Dame, and so on. He was also a lot of fun, and I treasured the time that we spent together. This particular year, he received some time off and informed us he would come stay with us for the holidays. I was beyond thrilled to be seeing one of my favorite relatives. One day, while both my parents were at work, he decided to take my brother and I to a nearby mall. At the time, my brother was 12 and I was 7. We had a good time going to the various stores, getting lunch, and watching skateboarders at an indoor park. Although my uncle loved us dearly, I wouldn't exactly call him the most attentive babysitter. While the three of us were heading out, my brother and my uncle were much farther ahead of me. Both of them walked extremely fast and seemed to be engaged in their conversation. Being a very small girl for my age, combined with having Lyme disease, made it difficult for me to walk at their pace. As hard as I tried to catch up with them, I only seemed to be falling further behind. Suddenly, from the left side, I felt someone grab me. It happened in an instant, and my mind raced while trying to process what was happening. Looking up, I saw him. A face that I recall clear as day 20 years later. He was an old man, perhaps late 70s, but his face was horribly disfigured. All of his skin hung low and poured over his other features. What I remember most was his nose, which was more of a giant tumor so large that it covered his entire mouth. Looking back, it is now clear to me that he had elephant man disease. The man did not say anything to me. Instead, he crouched down to my level and put his face just inches in front of mine. Then he made the most intense eye contact I have ever experienced. Both of his hands were wrapped around my arms so tightly that I winced in pain. Abruptly, he began shaking me, as if forcing me to look at him. I was so paralyzed in fear that I could not make a sound. For some reason, I simply stood there, frozen, staring directly at him. While this was happening, the mall was by no means empty. People passed by, but they either didn't notice or didn't care. After about a minute, which seemed far longer, adrenaline got the better of me, and I violently wriggled from his grip. In tears, I moved as briskly as I could towards my uncle and brother. Luckily, the man did not follow me. By this time, my family members had finally realized that I was gone, and both turned around while I approached them. Their backs were to me during the entire encounter, so they had no idea what just occurred. I didn't say anything to either of them because I was afraid somehow I had done something wrong. When I got home, I had bruises from where the man had grabbed me. I hid them from my mom so I didn't have to explain what had happened. That incident left me so traumatized that the very same night I went vegetarian. In my 7-year-old mind, every time I looked at meat, I would think of that man's face and the way he had stared so intently at me. I would have nightmares that he was coming back for me and was petrified to go back to that mall for many years. Now that I am an adult, I look back and wonder what exactly transpired. Did he want to kidnap me? Was he tired of being ignored by society? Perhaps he had dementia? I will never know. Even though I have empathy and wish him well, I also take solace in the fact that we will probably never meet again. Disclaimer. In no way, shape, or form is my intention to speak ill of individuals who have any type of deformity or condition. This story is simply my recollection of an event that occurred when I was a child. Please keep this in mind in your comments, as I would never judge someone based on physical characteristics that they cannot control.
First of all, I just wanted you all to know that I've been reading Let's Not Meet for a while now. I never posted anything myself. But I do have something that I'd like to share that still creeps me out just thinking about it. I'm from Sweden and English is not my native tongue, so please forgive me if my grammar isn't 100% correct. This happened a few years ago when I had just finished high school. I had just moved to a new town where I started working at a video game store in a mall a bit outside of town. It was really fun at first. I loved talking about games and met a lot of customers who I had a lot of really nice conversations with about games all day long. It really seemed like a dream job for a game nerd like me. Since I'm a female, I often had to deal with people being really questioning about my actual interest in video games. Sigh. But most of our customers were really friendly and non-prejudiced, which made working even more fun. Until one day. Our store had a lot of regulars, and I soon started to recognize almost every one of them. Most of them were just regular people coming in to pre-book some games or have a nice chat for a bit while looking through our new releases, while some of them were a bit more odd. I didn't really pay much attention to the odd ones. They didn't really do anything besides acting a bit weird, asking weird questions and stuff. One of the odd ones usually came in every day to help me sort all games in alphabetical order, which made me glad. I often had to run the store all by myself and had little time to do that kind of work between customers, unpacking boxes, and all the store marketing. He didn't really speak much, but I'm a very social person, and naturally I talked a lot to him and made a lot of jokes, which he seemed to appreciate in his own quiet way, like it was uncommon for him to have someone to talk to him at all. I thought he seemed nice, and assumed that he just had a hard time socializing with people, so I tried my best to win his trust, and to not say anything that would make him uncomfortable. But one day, he started to act a bit more weird than usual. It was a regular day at work, and the guy came in as usual, asking if I needed help with anything. I appreciated his offer, but gladly declined, and said that I had everything under control. As I started my daily routine in the store, marketing new releases, cleaning the floors, etc., I started to notice that the guy was following me around. He was really quiet, and every time I turned around, or noticed that he was staring at me, he looked away instantly. I didn't really think much about it at that point. I had too much work to do and kept on doing my routines and dealing with other customers. But he kept following me around, always staring right at me. After a couple of hours, I noticed he was still around. I guess I'd been too busy to notice him, but he was still in the store and still staring at me. I was about to close up when he started asking some really weird questions, like where I lived, if I had a boyfriend, what my full name was, and if he could add me as a friend on Facebook. I declined, telling him we had a strict policy at work not to add customers as friends on Facebook. Which I faked. There really isn't any policy. I just didn't know what to say, and his questions started to make me feel really uncomfortable. I told him politely that I had to close up the store. He nodded and started to walk away, slowly, turning around every now and then to see if I was still watching him. I closed up, went home, and didn't really think much about it. I told my current boyfriend at that time about the guy and his strange behavior. He sat quiet for a bit, but after a while, we both agreed that it really wasn't anything weird going on, and we both went to sleep. The next day seemed like any other day at work. I had just started doing my daily routines when the guy showed up again. I said hi, trying to sound as positive as possible, but he didn't answer me. He just quietly started to sort our games in alphabetical order, like he usually does. But I noticed that he was always keeping an eye on me. At this point, I actually started to freak out a bit, but luckily, it was a Saturday and I had a lot of customers, so I was never alone in the store. The day went on really quick, and when it was time to close up, there he was again, right in front of me. This time, he wasn't really as quiet as usual, though. He started to ask for my full name again and demanded that I would add him as a Facebook friend. I once again declined, and that's when he started to become a bit more threatening. He told me that he needed my address and said that he needed to know exactly where I lived, which I refused to answer. He was getting really angry and told me that it didn't matter, that he would find me anyway, that he would follow me home and get into my apartment when I least expected it. I started shaking while he was screaming at me, when finally, 2 guards doing their routine stroll around the mall came by and asked if everything was okay. The guy became nervous and ran away, and I said that everything was fine. He just seemed a bit odd, that's all. Even though I was still shaking, I didn't want to make a big scene about it. I just wanted to get home as soon as possible. I closed up again and headed outside when I saw him again. There he stood, right outside the mall, waiting for me. I felt every single hair on my body suddenly rising, but I kept my head high and walked right past him, like I haven't even noticed him. He started to call for me. "Hey you, stop right now, I just want to talk." And when I turned around, I noticed that he was following me. I started to walk even faster, even more scared, and went down to the subway. He was still following me. I waited for a couple of minutes and glanced at him every other second. As he stood about 10 to 13 feet away from me, always staring right at my face. He went on the same subway as me, and I could almost feel my heartbeat in my mouth. What was the matter with this guy? What did he want? I really didn't even want to know. I just wanted to get home without him following me. I texted my boyfriend that I was followed, and he told me to get off at the station before mine, and that he'd meet me there. I did as he said, still watching every move that guy made. The subway stopped and I went off, as did the guy. I went up the escalators and noticed that he was running towards me. I started to run as well, as fast as I could, up the escalators, where I finally saw my boyfriend waiting for me. As soon as we met up, the guy froze still, turned around, and started to run away. Just like when the guards at the mall approached us. My boyfriend tried to calm me down as we walked home, but I just couldn't get the guy's creepy stare out of my mind. Let's just say I didn't sleep well that night. The next day, I called my boss and explained what happened, and he told me to stay home for a couple of days, which I gladly did. My boyfriend was furious with hatred against this guy. Who knows what could have happened if I had walked home alone that night? It gave me shivers just thinking about it, and thinking about getting back to work and seeing him and his eyes staring at me again. I almost couldn't handle it. A couple of days later, my boyfriend sat me down by the kitchen table. His facial expression was totally serious. He held my hand, looked deep into my eyes, and told me that I never, ever had to be afraid to go to work again. I asked him what he meant, but he just shook his head and said that it all was taken care of, and that I didn't have to worry about it. I couldn't get anything out of him, but just as he had said, when I got back to work, the guy wasn't there. Not that day, or the next day, or the day after that. It was almost like he had disappeared. I didn't ask my boyfriend until years later about that guy again, and what he had actually meant when he said that it was all taken care of. He didn't want to tell me at first, but after I'd begged him for a while, he finally cracked. I think it's accurate to mention that my boyfriend had been involved with some kind of gang before meeting me. I don't know much about it. He told me that after I first told him about the first incident at work, he had contacted some of his former friends and asked them to track down this guy, and they had found out that this particular guy had been following and raping women around town for a long time before I even got to know him. The reason he had kept this from me was because he didn't want me to be more scared than I already was. But he assured me that he had been taken care of, and that I never had to be afraid again. I never asked him about what happened again after that, but just thinking about it still gives me shivers. I wonder how many girls before me were a victim to this guy. I wonder what he did to them, and I wonder what happened to him. The only thing I know is that I never saw his face again, and you know what? I'm really glad I didn't.
Back in my early 20s, I worked at an adult novelty store. I was used to creepers and not much fazed me at this point in my brief employment. A typical day consisted of an array of colorful people, all of which I'm sure would make great entries, especially the geriatric men that would come in and act like they had bad eyesight and have me read the directions on the back of the penis enhancement creams to get cheap thrills. Gross, I know. After a while, you just learn how to deal with these people and make them move on. Applying for this job, I was naive to the extent of the nut jobs I would have before me. This job was actually very character building in many ways. Enough about that. This particular day, I was working an all-day Sunday shift. Normal to have but a handful of customers. I was camped out in my desk chair inside the circle counter in the middle of the store watching my Golden Girls box set on the television that hung above me. Typical Sunday. I'm assuming it was nearly 1 p.m. at the time. I happened to look out the glass door window to see a red pickup pull into a parking space way far back in the lot. Strange. There were no cars but mine parked out front. The store was completely isolated except for a 7-Eleven caddy corner separated by an alleyway. I was all alone. I see a skinny guy get out and starts to slowly make his way to the storefront. He comes in, I greet him, and he just stands there. I turn away from him, enough to keep him in my peripheral, then he slowly proceeds towards me. He makes his way up to the counter and I'm now facing him. He had bloodshot, watery eyes, dressed in baggy clothes and a cap. He hands me a wad of dirty crumpled money and says in a monotone voice, "I found this in the parking lot. I want to give it to you in case someone wants to reclaim it." I said for him to keep it. He did not bend over in the lot to pick anything up on his way to the store. I also found it strange that he parked so far away. I was onto him but already getting creeped. I just wanted him to go away. He gave me a sick feeling. Considering the clientele, this was a big deal. He told me to take the money several times, and he was so persistent. Wanting him to just get the hell out, I took the money. He then said to me, "Whatever you do, don't give it back to me." I said, "Okay." He starts to slowly walk out, and just as he reaches the door, and I'm about to sigh my breath of relief, he turns and inches his way back towards me. "Can I have that money back?" he asks. "I thought you said you didn't want it," I replied. "I don't," he said. "Okay, I'll keep it here for safekeeping." This went on for a few solid minutes. I knew I was dealing with a real piece of work, and he kept trying to get behind me, and I was wheeling around in a circle so I could face him at all times. His eyes were so intense and fixated on me the entire time. When he finally left, I was shaken because he was so eerie. I looked down at the filthy, tattered, crumpled money and counted out 6 $1 bills. What the hell? I thought. But I shook it off as another day in the life at the sex shop. A couple of hours go by, and I had swept all the previous weirdness under the rug. It was a slow day, and the store was dead. Then, lo and behold, in he slowly walked. Again. My heart sinks. I grab my phone. He walks up to me and asks if anyone had come in to claim the money. I say no, and point to the money on the counter. Believe me when I say I did not want this money for myself. He then asks for it back. I said that I thought he told me not to give it back. I felt like this was some weird, sick game I was involved in, and his character was so off-putting and unpredictable I felt like I really needed to play along. He then proceeds to beg me for the money, saying he needed it really bad. I broke. I hand it to him. His eyes burn into mine, his face expressionless and voice flat. "I told you not to give it back." I froze up. We just stared at each other, and I was picturing gravestones in my head. It felt like eternity. Then a couple walk in. That's when he grabs the $6 and leaves. I'm pretty sure something bad would have gone down if people hadn't come in. He never lunged at me, but there was something sinister about him. I told my coworker shortly after. She said it happened to another girl that worked there too, but he didn't stick around because there was 2 people working. A completely different type of freak than I was used to. I had another creepy incident, with a man pleasuring himself in front of the glass windows at night after I had locked the doors. That one I had no questions to involve the police, and I quit. That was a weird little moment of my life. I have several stories I'd like to put on here. This is a good tame one for me to break ice. Creepy menacing guy with $6. Let's not meet again. Never.
I'm a 26-year-old female who's about 5 foot nothing and generally harmless looking. I have no idea what it is about being seemingly harmless, but it tends to attract a whole array of bad news. Don't believe me? Go ask a soft-spoken tiny girl who gives you the first impression of, "Isn't she just adorable?" And more than likely, she'll have enough stories to make you worry about your sanity. This is compounded by my overall attitude of, "I'll be sugar, rainbow, and sunshine right up until you give me a reason not to." A job in retail makes the whole mess about as fun as bamboo splinters under your fingernails. Whoever came up with the idea the customer is always right needs to be shot, resurrected, and shot again. That said, I'll do anything within the limits of my job for a customer. I like helping customers out. Most retail workers do. A little lesson is to be had here for those who have never worked in a service-based company. Most employees want to help you. Let them, and you'll both walk away from the encounter in a much better frame of mind. If they don't, you should ask yourself if it's a situation beyond their control. If the answer is even anywhere close to it might be, let them off the hook. I've seen too many retail employees get a look of dread on their face when something goes wrong as I, myself, am out being a customer. It bothers me every single time because I know what it's like to think, great, now I'm gonna get yelled at and called names for something that isn't my fault. Or if they're mad enough, they might even call in about me, and then my boss will be wondering what in God's name I'm doing. You know what said employee can do about it? Sit there and take it, while apologizing for your inconvenience. But I digress. I work as an overnight supervisor to a 24-hour drugstore. We get plenty of creepy people in, being a fair-sized city with only 2 24-hour pharmacies in town. I have some really weird stories. Maybe I'll tell a few more at a later date. The evening of this particular incident had me working on a Saturday night with 2 other front-end employees. Saturday nights mean ad tags. We overnighters, the few, the lucky, are the ones stuck with this joyful job. It means 10 hours of monotony and a lot of back and forth around the store. Usually the nights pass with some regulars and some meth heads drunks, some regular meth heads drunks, and the occasional sick person or person with a sick loved one at home. Most intoxicated persons are in and out like a flash. But I've noticed, the more out of their wits they are, the higher the potential for creepy is. So you learn to watch the ones with nervous twitches. It was about 1:30 a.m. when this taller, wiry man walked into my store. His brown hair was cropped pretty short, and he was dressed fairly casually. I didn't even realize his presence in the store until the cashier for the night, Daniel, came up to me and muttered something about the weird guy wandering around the front of the store. Daniel is middle-aged, but mischievous and crotchety are 2 very apt descriptions of him. You never quite know when he's just stirring the pot, so I searched the guy down to see what was bothering Daniel. I'd been thinking it was more than likely he'd noticed something strange about the guy and was worried about shoplifting. This would not be the first or last time his so-called shoplifter turned out to be some poor, exhausted father or husband sent out to get cold medicine. I found him pacing along the front wall and asked if he needed any help in my cheeriest customer service voice. The moment he turned around, I froze. This man radiated subdued violence. It surrounded him like an aura of menace. I couldn't pinpoint what was bothering me. The weirdly still expression, maybe? Or the way he was standing. He was unnaturally tense during my whole experience with him, like he was ready to go off at the first provocation. Truthfully, I still haven't quite figured it out, but he was just off enough to send up red flags just looking at him. Immediately uncomfortable, I was all too happy when he muttered, "No, I'm, just looking." I never have figured out how to gracefully exit the situation when a customer has nothing left to say to you but still stands there, staring, which feels almost expectant, even if it's not. After a minute or so of avoiding meeting his eyes, I told him my usual line of, "All right, well, let us know if you need anything." I backed into the aisle I'd emerged from and hurried off to busy myself with more ad tags. Daniel could keep an eye on him if he felt like it. Dude was scary, and I was the only female on shift. No thank you, they don't pay me enough. It's not long before I start to feel like I'm being watched, and creepy suspect number 1 is lurking at the top of the aisle, staring. I finish all of the tags in line for that aisle, and I'm relieved when I have to move across a store for others in a different section. Again, a few moments passed, and that weird prickly feeling hits me, and he's at the end of the aisle, staring right at me. I ask for the second time if I can help him find anything, and he pretends to busy himself with some vitamins he picked up at random. He gave me a creepy grin and told me again that he was just looking. Yeah, sure, I just bet you were. This continues for another half hour or so, until I find myself heading up to the front to ring up a customer. I had no idea where Daniel was, but it didn't matter. I was grateful for the distraction. That was, until I noticed Creeper following me up to the register, still staring. I conducted the transaction as quickly as possible, and after a few too many nervous glances in my creepy's direction, the customer took off like someone had lit him on fire. I decided to go outside for my lunch break. It was cold, and I thought maybe, since Mr. Creeper didn't have a particularly warm-looking coat on, he'd leave me alone. I searched out one of my coworkers and let them know my intentions, clocked out, and stepped outside and into my car. Now, normally, I try to avoid smoking in my car. I've never liked the way it stinks up a car, but desperate times, desperate measures. I lock the car doors and roll down the window just far enough to fit my cigarette through to ash it. I picked up a book, turned to the page I'd left off on, and settled in. A few paragraphs later, I heard someone banging on my window. I jumped and looked up. Guess who? That's right, Mr. Creepy. He grinned at me in what I'm sure was supposed to be a sheepish fashion, but it came out more Norman Bates, if you know what I mean. I again asked him if I could help him, and he said he'd been looking for something in particular that he'd like my help with. I told him firmly that there were 2 other employees in the store that would have to help him. I was off the clock. He frowned, and after a moment of me pointedly ignoring him in favor of tensely not being able to concentrate on my book, he went back inside. My lunch break ended, and I still hadn't seen him come back out. I hurried inside, clocked in, and called the other shift supervisor, Mark, into the office. I explained the situation and asked him if he could go deal with the dude. Mark sighed, nodded, and went to talk to the guy. I busied myself in the office with some training sessions I'd been putting off for a while. Mark came back inside the office wearing a very bewildered look. I raised an eyebrow and he sat down. That guy was really weird. Weird is not quite the adjective I'd use. What did he say? He wanted to talk to you again. I told him you had other things you needed to be doing, but I'd be happy to help him. That agitated him. You thought he was freaky beforehand. He visibly shuddered, and I raised an eyebrow again. He asked if I knew what time you got off, or where you lived. What the fuck? Exactly. I told him we were legally obligated not to share such information, and that if he wasn't going to buy anything, he needed to leave. Then he left. I followed him out just in case. He was looking around your car until he noticed I had followed, and then he got in his car and left. I decided I wasn't going to stick around to see if he was going to come back, and noped out of the rest of my shift. Shortly after, my store set up a guard contract with the local police department, and I haven't seen him since.
This happened when I was in high school, maybe between my freshman and sophomore years, so 2005-ish. I was on my way home from school. I had about a 1 to 2 hour more ride home on the bus, 2 to 3 buses depending on the day and traffic flow. Sometimes I'd fall asleep and just nearly managed to wake up before my stop. At the time, I lived in the suburbs, about 5 to 10 miles south of Chicago and from my high school. This day, it was 4 or 5 p.m., because that was usually about the time I'd be walking or getting home. I know that it was quite dark and kind of chilly outside, being that the clocks had been set an hour ahead for the fall/winter months. I was on my 3rd and final bus, and I was approaching my stop. I got off, and I started walking home from the bus stop, which was about 2, almost 3 blocks from my building. In the suburbs, the streetlights are spread out a little more than the city, and it's much quieter. There's less traffic on the streets and the sidewalks. On this night, the street light closest to my stop was out, unfortunately, so I hated getting off during the fall and winter at this stop, virtually walking almost half of this residential block or more in darkness pretty much. So I'm about half down the first block when this unmarked white van pulled up beside me, still moving, and the passenger opens the side door. I can't remember what he said exactly. It was something along the lines of, "Hey sweetheart, do you need a ride?" I said, "No thank you," and I kept walking, but a little bit faster. I naturally walk fast, so I was damn near about to break into a small jog. I remember a sinking feeling in my stomach because they were not leaving me alone. I continued to walk in an effort to enforce that I wasn't interested in whatever they wanted. They continued to ride slowly beside me with the side door open, speeding up a little as I attempted to do the same thing. I walked ahead a little faster, looking around my surroundings to see if there was someone I could signal to or alert with a scream or something, since this was just before I had a cell phone that was consistently on and available for use. Luckily, for me, I believe a car was turning onto the same block going in the opposite direction, and because this street is residential and two-way, it was fairly narrow, so they were forced to keep driving. I kept looking left to right and behind me to make sure they didn't follow me home, and I proceeded to open my apartment screen door in record timing. Creepy guys in the unmarked white van, let's not meet again.